Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with everyone today. So I'm going to talk to you today about microcredit and microsavings in particular. Microcredit, start off by explaining, is something that has captured the fascination of people for several decades now, including myself, starting in 1992. The basic premise is very straightforward. You need money to make money. It's a cliche, but it's true. And when you're poor, this is really true. When you're poor in a developing country, you cannot just go to a bank and get a loan. This is fairly obvious. And microcredit was basically a business process innovation. That sounds kind of dorky, but that's basically what it was. It was figuring out how can we make loans to people who really don't have access to that type of credit and allow them to take that money, invest it into an enterprise. And when we say enterprise here, I mean something really small, smaller than this rug. A rug, this huge would be a big enterprise. We're talking something small where you're selling vegetables on a rug, on a street, or in a market in a developing country. And the idea is that with access to credit, they could either start that type of enterprise or maybe take an enterprise which was half this rug and make it the whole rug or something even bigger. So I started off in 1992 and I got involved in a program in Latin America. I'd finished 2 years of investment banking, kind of learning about the banking world. And then I heard about this, and it really struck a chord for me personally because, well, as a banker, the idea that you could use this basic concept of banking to help the poor made a lot of sense. So off I went, kind of wide-eyed and, well, full of hair, down to Central America. And I got really excited by what I was doing. But the first thing that struck me when I got to Central America was how many questions I really had and others had about what this organization was doing, what others were doing, about whether they were having an impact, how they were having impact, why were they choosing this type of approach versus some other approach. And one of the things that really struck me in particular had to do with the interest rates. And I thought about, well, I understand as a banker, if you're borrowing at a high interest rate but then investing at an even higher interest rate, well, that's a good thing. You make money that way. But a lot of people were using the money for things that were not in the enterprise. And there's nothing wrong with that. They were making their lives better by getting access to credit and using it to do something like buy cement for their house, and then convert their house, which was had a dirt floor, and put in cement, and now they have a cement floor. And this is good. But then I thought to myself, well, wait a second, and others thought the same thing. Wait a second, why not save up for that one? Right? What's the story in terms of how your life is really going to turn out so much differently if you just delay doing that for 3 months and you save up? And as a finance person, it's pretty obvious what the benefits are of delaying that. You get to save all that interest expense, and instead, that's money that can go to food for your children. So that's a very important difference. So one of the things, so that's basically what I'm going to talk to you about today, is the conversion of thinking not just about credit, but about thinking about savings. And how is it that we can help to create better savings products? The same way that microcredit was a business process innovation for figuring out how to get loans to people, now what you're seeing is a huge push for figuring out what the right business process innovation is and the product design innovation to help getting savings accounts to people. Now, there's two basic points to what I'm going to talk about. One is the limbo game of savings, hence the title of this talk. The limbo game of savings is basically, the analogy here is that we want to see how low can we go in terms of how little can we do and still make a big change. And one lesson that we've learned is we actually don't have to do too much to the way savings products are offered, and we can make big changes. Now, it doesn't mean that the lowest bar is the optimal. The goal is not simply to go low. The goal is to be effective. And so I'm going to talk about a series of tests around the world to do that. The second point is we have to get out from thinking about what people should do. This is not an economics or a finance class where we're going to write up on a chalkboard or a spreadsheet what people should do. We have to think about what people do. And there's a huge difference. And when we understand that difference, it's going to lead to much better thinking about what the right policy is to put in place. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of an abstract example of this difference between should do and do. Suppose we played the following game. I had you choose a number between 0 and 100. On a piece of paper, you write this down. And the winner is the person who chooses the number closest to 2/3 of the average number written. What would you put down? I first got to play this game when I was in graduate school. And I was working for Dick Thaler, who's one of the founders of the behavioral economics field. We played this game with the Financial Times, where the winner of this game, everyone sent in a postcard, and the winner got 2 business class tickets to cross the Atlantic on British Airways. So big stakes were here. So think about what you would put in this game. So here's the results of the game with the Financial Times. So 1,382 people played. 5% of the people put some number between 40 and 60. Most of those put 50. So these are people who really weren't thinking very much, right? So they forgot to take 2/3 of the average. They just said, well, you're going to put a random number between 0 and 100, so the average will be 50, and there you go, I'm going to put 50. So 5% did that. This is the group that I find most interesting in some respect. So this is the people right around 33. In fact, the big bulk there is 33. 19% of the people thought that basically nobody else is going to think. Because what they're saying to themselves is, look, 0 to 100 is random they're going to choose random numbers between 0 and 100. The average of that will be 50. I'm going to be one smarter than everybody else who is not going to think, and I'm going to put 33. So now we go one level of iteration further, and we have a lot of people put 22, and this is the bar that includes 22. So everybody puts 22 is basically saying, I think everybody else thinks that nobody else is going to think, and then stop, right? So we go one more. And here we get the mode that has 15. These people think that everybody else thinks that everybody else thinks that nobody else is going to think. So hopefully you know where this is going. We get another group here between 11 and 2. And lastly, and these in some respects are also the really interesting people. So these are the people that thought all the way through and they said, well, okay, I'm in game theory. These people basically have taken too much game theory. That's the punchline. These people are the people that said, there's an answer to this question. It's the answer at which, if everybody puts this answer, nobody has any incentive to deviate. It's the equilibrium in dork terms. And so there you go, and there's the answer. I'm going to put 1 or 0. I've never seen this win the game. Even if you play it again and again and again, it's hard to get that to win the game. The winning answer turned out to be 18. But the real lesson from this is that the real answer, the person who won the game won not because they guessed the right number, but because they wrote the right histogram. They recognized that really this is an assessment of how people think about other people, and the right answer is to recognize that you're going to get a little of everything, and you just have to figure out how many levels of iteration most people are going to think, and your best assessment of the people in your room is the person who can make that assessment best is the winner. Okay, so now I'm going to use this and think about savings product design, but I'm going to first take one extra leap and talk about politics. Politicians have done us a great favor in teaching us something that can be really readily applied to savings product design. So the fiscal cliff and the now sequester that we're in tell a very, very interesting, and in some sense I'm being very overly simplistic about the issues, but they tell a very simple story. Politicians have temptations to spend money and not meet budgets. It's very difficult to come to terms with the other side of the aisle. Things they don't want to do are very difficult to do, basically. The fiscal cliff was a huge commitment device in which they made it really, really expensive to not do the thing that they knew they had to do but never wanted to, which is make a deal. And they made it so that it was so expensive that they had to do it. It was basically the same thing as someone who is on a diet and wants to avoid chocolate cake knows that if it's right there in front of them, they'll eat it, and so goes through great lengths to make chocolate cake really expensive and really unavailable to themselves. It's the same basic idea. So what's striking here is with the fiscal cliff, it worked, and the sequester, it didn't. And there's two things that I think are very different that we're seeing that help us think about savings product design as well. The first lesson is that the consequence for failure with the fiscal cliff was steeper. Right? So the action that would take the consequence of failure was higher. Now, one thing that we're going to find in the commitment savings world that I'm going to show you is that that's not always true. That's not a general lesson, that the starker the consequence, the better the commitment device. The second lesson we learned is that language matters. So I can fall off a cliff and die. I can't fall off a sequester and die. Like, most people don't even know what one is. I'm willing to bet that Googling define sequester was a very common search term over the past few weeks, as most people wanted to find out what exactly is one and why should we be scared of it. Likewise, the media did not create any sort of frenzy about it. Right? So language matters for how we actually change our behavior. So So now, here's the first commitment device that we tried in the space of savings. In the Philippines, did a lot of work with households trying to find out what were the things that they struggled for financially. And one of the common stories that we were told had to do with temptation with spending money, with putting money aside, saving up for something that they want to, but then something always comes up that gets in the way and the money flitters away. That something might be about their own temptation, it might be about household, it might be about their husband's temptation, but regardless, they lose the money. So we did a study that was very much motivated by Odysseus, from the epic story of Odysseus, who ties himself to the mast in order to resist the temptation of the sirens. If he hears the sirens singing, then he's going to steer the ship off into the rocks and crash the ship. And so he ties himself to the mast so that he can listen to the sirens, hear the thing that's so tempting, but not actually succumb to the temptation. So we designed a savings product that had two simple features to it. One was a simple box, a box that you put your money into, and that the bank had the key. You didn't have the key. So you had to take the box to the bank to empty out the money and put it into the bank account. The second rule was that you couldn't withdraw the money out of the bank account until you reached a goal being an amount of money that you had to get to. Suppose it was the cement on the floor that I alluded to earlier, or maybe it was a date like an anniversary. So this worked great, and savings went up by 300% for the people who opened this account. And what was really most important when we started looking at impacts of the household, and we see that women who had access to this account had more power to make decisions in the household. And in fact, the durable goods, the things for the household that the women cared about, the number went up by 50% compared to a control group in terms of the increase in decision-making power that she had in that regard. Other researchers in Kenya did a study, and these studies are all done with Innovations for Poverty Action, which is an organization that I started, which I'm going to tell you a little bit more at the end, that is basically doing two things. That is setting up studies across the world to understand what works and what doesn't in the fight against poverty, and then taking those lessons and trying to bring them to organizations that can take them to scale, governments, donors, investors, nonprofit organizations, et cetera. And one of the themes is that we need to have more studies in different contexts to really understand and break through the kind of one study, one location problem in order to get a better understanding of grander lessons that can be transportable. So here in this study, it was a study focused on health and had this same similar box where the money was also allocated to health, right? It didn't have rules that were nearly as strict about how they could withdraw the money, but they found from this account alone, and just having this box alone, that health savings goes up by 66%. So then in another study that I've done in Uganda, we worked in schools, and here we wanted to understand something about how strict to make those rules in the savings account. So we had two different types of schools and a control group. In one set of schools, the accounts that the children had were named as their super saver accounts that were for educational expenses, and they were locked in for educational expenses. At the end, they would get a voucher for all the money they put in, and that voucher could only be used to buy pens and papers and workbooks and things that they needed for school. And it was done right there with an educational fair, kind of, so the sales took place right when they got their voucher. The other treatment group, though, they just got cash. So they got the money out of the account, but they didn't have to use it on educational expenses. But they could, and they made it really easy for them, and that's important, making it easy for people. Right? So we made it so that right when they got the cash, the people were there to sell them the stuff for school. So it turned out that the second group worked, but not the first. People didn't want to tie their hands that much. They didn't want it that strict, and so they didn't engage in the first place. They didn't put money in the account. But the second account, the one that was voluntary, worked great, and educational expenses went up, and test scores went up, which is a really striking result when you actually can get test scores to go up just by getting the children to put a little bit of money aside to buy supplies for their school, for themselves in school. So another study started opening our eyes that we can go even lower in terms of the rules and the bells and whistles. So this was a study in Malawi done by other researchers, also with IPA, in which they offered farmers at harvest season a special account. There was a commitment account that could only be used then at the next agricultural season for inputs. And the striking thing here was that it worked great. Farmers liked the fact that this account was offered to them. They They took money that they had saved, they spent more money in the farms, more fertilizer, more land was cultivated, income went up, and household expenditures, a really good, important final outcome, went up by 17%. But here's the striking thing, the money never went into the commitment account. They got this commitment account and they put all the money into their other account that was the highly liquid one, the one that was fully flexible. So it really said that the change that was taking place was entirely in their head. And it was like this mental account got created, that they got really excited about having this goal. And that's what changed behavior, which really leads right to the next study. And this one's underway. This is one that I'm doing in Ghana, where that's what we did, is we just labeled the accounts. We just said, fine, you have a bank account. We're giving you a second bank account, and there's a name on it. It's your health account, it's your education account, it's your business account. Nothing more. There was no bells and whistles below. This is about as low as we can go on the Limbo game. And from this alone, we're still finding a 16 to 30% increase in savings just from that. So we're still in the field learning more about how this is changing actual expenditures. But then we're going to take this one step lower, and we're going to actually give them a second account with no name on it. And that's going to be about as low as I think we can possibly go. And that one is entering the field now, and we'll find out in a year or two how that works. So these projects are all over the world, and that's one of the most important lessons, I think, that what we're talking about here is about how people engage financial services to reach goals in their life. And it's a very important tool. We take it for granted here in the United States to a large extent, the access to a bank account to put money aside. But this is not something to take granted in a developing country. But the striking thing is how we design that account makes a huge difference. And we can use these ideas and this understanding about individual decision-making and household challenges that people face to better design savings products in order to help people reach their goals around the world. But the most important thing of that is we have to remember to really understand what people do, not what they should do. And it's not about solving the math problem that we would be taught in an economics class or a financial literacy course. It's about recognizing the true nature of human behavior and designing programs around that, designing products around that, rather than thinking that people will be molded into the products that we offer. And so I want to thank you all very much. Look forward to the rest of the day.